Hello there. Today I'm going to be doing a short breakdown of the Procedural Worlds project that I've been working on for a few weeks. And I'm going to start by displaying the final results and then start to go step by step on how I approach this process and how I achieved the results. So let's get to that. So I have three variations of the city. It's a sort of an abstract Blade Runner-esque looking aesthetics, which I wanted to go for. Um, the population of the buildings is random. The buildings are created procedurally using a Python script that I wrote in Maya, and yeah, so I just wanted to create like different variations and show just like the power of basically using numbers to create something beautiful. So I'm gonna start by breaking down how I went through the process. So these are the things and steps I'm going to go through and cover them briefly with respect to each one of them. So the first aspect of this whole thing was me writing a Python script which helped me sort of create this modular buildings. And the way I wanted to approach this was like I wanted to create these abstract modules or building blocks, just like a Lego block, uh, which I hand model and then use those modular pieces to run it through a Python script that I wrote and create random procedural building pieces. So that was the intention, and I can just go through the modules and the pieces that I used. Oops. So these small pieces here are the modular structures. These are literally the Lego blocks of the buildings, and these are the buildings that were spit out from the Python script that I used to generate them basically. So I can do a quick demo of that right now. So this is a auto population or a building procedural building construction script. It basically takes all the it takes a number of modular pieces, gives you a bunch of parameters. So I can for that to work, let me select some of the pieces. If I hit play, you can see that I have a nice little UI to just plug in some parameters according to the way I want it. For now, I'm just gonna leave this at 8 to 10. So I'm not gonna go through all the parameters, but because I think the variables itself are self-explanatory and I don't need to sort of explain that. Um, do a 2 and 2. Can have like a base mesh, a top mesh. Let's say it's 2 as height. Combine meshes, and once I hit generate, it's gonna throw out a random looking building with the parameters that I just described through the UI. Um, so that's like basically step one, and I used all these pieces in mix and match to just like generate these random buildings, which are procedural, which are random. Every time I generate it, it spits out a different kind of building. So I would just like do that at a click of a button and just go with the kind of aesthetics I wanted. And like, yeah. So that's the first process in the whole step. I'm not gonna run through the script because it is almost it's almost 500 lines, so there's no point in just going through that. But in yeah, it's just as simple as taking all the parameters, using input parameters, and just using those values to do a mix and match randomization um, to generate the buildings. So after that, there is also I split the buildings out, and there's a little bit of cleaning up that's required after doing that, mainly because the script doesn't get rid of the hidden faces or the inset faces, so you end up with this building modules which are like super high in try count, and you have these inset faces which are, it's not game ready. That's the point. So I do sort of have to go through a little bit of a cleaning process to get a more game ready and efficient model for me to use. And the second thing is like the way I've structured Um, so whenever I'm working on a project, I sort of think about it in terms of the workflow, including the lighting. And in something like this, I wanted to use a dynamic system because I didn't want to rely on manually sitting and unwrapping these models when I spit them out. So instead, what I've done is like each module is unwrapped and each module has its own material group. So depending on how many modules I select to create a building, then it will have that many number of material groups when it's combined together. So if I select four pieces and I make a building out of that, I'll have four material groups. So this will be stacked, so which conserves UV space or resolution, and it'll be a good textile density, but it also means that I won't be able to use static lighting solutions for this, and that's why, and I wanted to use ray trace solutions for this anyway, so that was another thing I had to keep in mind before doing that. Yeah, so I have the buildings, clean it up a little bit, and then combine it. Then the next process would be to basically migrate these pieces into Unreal Engine and sort of um, run through a population script to basically generate the city. Now I'm going to quickly jump into Unreal to show you that. Right. So yeah, I brought in all these models, including. So I had a composition in mind whenever I was making it. So I based my geometry and I created the geometry and pieces based of the aesthetics I had in my mind. And the aesthetics was basically is like a little inspiration from Blade Runner, but also a very abstract sci-fi looking world with like an foreign or an alien feeling to it, especially with this whole center mother piece floating around, which like yeah, so that was the whole intention of it. So what I did was I created this nope, that is not the blueprint. So I wrote a small construction script where the blueprint takes a few variables, which is a mesh itself, the number of buildings, X and Y, transformation jitter and scale jitter, and basically spits out a randomization population script. So what's happening is it's going to take a piece and it randomly populates that around the scene, and depending on the parameters that I describe under it. So this basically ensures that every time I open Unreal Engine, I end up with a different looking city or a world or a scene altogether because of this script. And this gave me some form of randomization. So that's how like most of the population is. But I did hand play some of the buildings and some of the pieces like the hero assets like the mothership and one of this building and uh, piece here. But the whole idea was like majority of it is procedurally generated, which came from the Python script, and it's randomly placed around the world to populate it. The same thing with the cars too. It's using Yeah, it's using a quick model that I made on Maya, and then it also runs through a population script, which randomizes the scale and transformation and the way it populates depending on the variables it's defined under. So that way you have some more randomization with how the cars look every time you open it up. In addition to that, um, I made some abstract symbols and abstract neon signs, which don't really mean anything, and they're just like they're just gibberish. But then it just sort of goes with the whole aesthetics of everything looking a little bit more abstract in terms of yeah, rather than looking realistic. Yeah, so those are just modular pieces that I made in Maya and then just exported it, added a few emissive materials. That's pretty much it. The second aspect of this whole thing was optimization. Um, each building is a few thousand tries, even after cleaning up, so they can get like pretty expensive in terms of the try counts, and they were crossing a few hundred millions once started popping it with like hundreds and hundreds of these. So Unreal has this sweet auto LOD system where you can basically go in and then describe uh, multiple LODs. I can see on the top left here where it automatically you can describe what's the percentage of reduction you want, what's the screen space you want it to be influencing, so that way like it automatically reduces the try count without having to create LOD versions yourself in Maya. So that's a pretty sweet feature Unreal has, and so I've made use of that to reduce the impact on my GPU. Um, so that was yeah, and the next aspect was obviously texturing these things. So I pull them into Substance um, Painter, and then again, like since I structured these models in such a way that each module has its own material group, like I said, so they ended up with their own material slot in Unreal. So that way, like I could texture each module and then add that corresponding material to the whole building with the corresponding material slot, and then you'd have a building with that looks, something like this. So that was the workflow intended there. Um, so the next aspect was basically scene variation, lighting, and sort of like controlling the composition to a way to an extent that you can. Because since it is random and since things are like procedural, there is there is a form of randomness that you cannot avoid completely. Um, so the first few steps were like atmospherics, obviously. So sorry, it's basically bringing the I used a volumetric cloud plugin that I found online. It gives me that sweet, you know, realistic looking clouds with some realistic scattering. It's like with like based off physical values that can easily plug in, and a few of the VFX systems that I built, including some volumetric scattering fogs. For example, if I go here, so I have these boxes which, if I were to, oh, it's probably because my engine scalability is on medium. Um, yeah. So yeah, so basically this is like placing around some atmospherics around. This is a volumetric fog uh, blueprint which I created, which basically takes a 3D texture and then injects volumetric scattering information into it based on the lights around and the lighting data around. So my whole point was to use ray traced features for every single one. So in this aspect, I used ray traced shadows, ray traced AOs, ray traced GI, ray traced reflections. So pretty much all the aspects that I can use ray tracing for is being used right now. Some of the subsystems don't give the best result, and obviously backlighting setup is always going to be superior compared to ray traced, at least for the next 10 years, according to me. But um, yeah, I just wanted to dabble with it and see how the results would end up, and yeah, it came up pretty well. I do have the lowest GPU in terms of RTX, so my GPU does suffer when I'm trying to ray trace all the subsystems. So that's why I have disabled it currently, but if I were to go back, probably start lagging a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm doing some of the most expensive subsystems under ray tracing, so it is going to drop in frames, and it's not something that will be game ready and something that requires careful attention when you're optimizing it. Um, Let me see. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It was like a quick breakdown, more than a tutorial, than just to show guide you through how my workflow was, how my flow of thought was, and how I achieved the following effects. So it's incredible what you can do with just a little bit of math, and it's the most minimum amount of modeling and texturing. Um, yeah, that's thanks for watching and hope you enjoyed it.